The Colorado sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Lin Mei hung suspended above the roaring bonfire, her wrists bound to wooden posts with rough hemp rope that had already rubbed her skin raw and bleeding. Below her feet, flames danced upward like demons reaching for her soul. The heat so intense it made her cotton dress smoke at the edges, while sparks landed on her bare arms like tiny brands. 60 seconds. Someone in the crowd shouted with cruel anticipation. That's all the foreign witch has left. The mob of 70 townspeople pressed closer, their faces twisted with hatred as they watched the 19-year-old Chinese girl struggle against her bonds. Sweat and tears streamed down Lin Mei's face as she fought desperately to lift her legs higher away from the hungry blaze that crackled and spat embers into the scorching afternoon air. "Please," she gasped in heavily accented English, her voice barely carrying over the crowd's jeers. "I, innocent father, come back for me." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The inferno beneath her feet roared louder, and she could smell the acrid stench of her own hair beginning to singe. Through the smoke and terror, her mind flashed to the strange paper scrap she had found in her shack 2 weeks ago, a torn piece with her father's handwriting that simply said, "Watching over you, my daughter," which she had dismissed as wishful thinking, her grief-stricken mind creating hope where none existed. 50 seconds. The flames licked higher, and Lin Mei closed her eyes, whispering a prayer in Mandarin, as death reached for her with fiery fingers, unaware that very human eyes had indeed been watching over her from the shadows of an abandoned mine. 3 months earlier, Lin Mei had arrived in Cinder Bluff on July 15th, aboard a dust-covered stagecoach, carrying nothing but a canvas bag and a torn letter that had become her most precious possession. The paper, creased from countless readings, bore her father's careful handwriting and mentioned this remote Colorado mining town and the last place Chen Wei had been seen alive before disappearing into the wilderness 2 years ago. The letter itself was incomplete, missing its final page that had been lost during her desperate flight from San Francisco's Chinatown, when hip Yi-Tong assassins had discovered her hiding place. What remained spoke of danger of evil men who meant harm to their family, and of promises that somehow felt more like farewells than hope for reunion. Lin Mei had interpreted her father's words as the final message of a dying man, not knowing that the missing page contained specific instructions that would have changed everything. Cinder Bluff squatted in the shadow of snow-capped peaks like a diseased animal, its weathered buildings and rutted streets bearing witness to the harsh realities of frontier life. The town's 1,200 residents included exactly 7 Chinese immigrants, all of whom worked the most dangerous jobs for half a white man's wages, and lived in ramshackle quarters on the wrong side of the railroad tracks, where respectable folks wouldn't venture after dark. Lin Mei took the only employment available to a Chinese woman washing clothes in the stifling back room of Murphy's General Store for 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. The work paid barely enough for a tiny shack behind the laundry and 1 meal a day. But she endured it with quiet dignity, speaking little English and avoiding the townspeople's contemptuous stares that followed her like shadows. But she was not entirely alone. In the weeks following her arrival, Lin Mei began to notice small signs that someone was watching over her. A plate of food left outside her door during particularly cold nights, a broken window in her shack mysteriously repaired, while she worked stray dogs that seemed unusually well fed, despite their owner being too poor to spare scraps. She had even found that torn paper with her father's handwriting, though she convinced herself it was merely her imagination conjuring hope from desperation. She attributed these small kindnesses to the saints her Catholic friends in San Francisco had told her about, never suspecting that very human eyes were keeping vigil from the abandoned Copper Creek mine that honeycombed the hills above town, where a gaunt figure spent his days developing photographs in makeshift darkness and his nights slipping into town like a ghost. Sam Colton had been watching Lin Mei from the day she arrived, though he couldn't have explained why if pressed. At 32, he was a man hollowed out by tragedy and filled with the restless energy of someone who could never stay in one place too long. His weathered face and gray eyes held stories he refused to tell, and his worn leather chaps bore the stains of 1,000 miles in the saddle each mile, an attempt to outrun memories that followed him like hunting wolves. 7 years earlier, in a Kansas town called Cedar Ridge, Sam had watched his Cherokee wife Sarah and their 6-year-old daughter Emma burned alive by a mob convinced that Sarah's Indian witchcraft had caused their crop failures. He'd been 20 miles away buying supplies for their small farm when it happened, returning to find nothing but ashes, charred bones, and the acrid smell of burned flesh that still haunted his dreams. The sheriff's shrugged explanation that justice had been served had driven Sam to the edge of madness, and only the threat of joining his family in death had stopped him from taking violent revenge. Since then, Sam had drifted from town to town like smoke on the wind, taking odd jobs and never staying long enough to form attachments. He'd sworn off involvement in other people's troubles, but something about Lin Mei's quiet strength reminded him of Sarah's gentle dignity in the face of prejudice. While her vulnerable isolation stirred protective instincts he thought had died with his family. What Sam didn't know was that he wasn't the only one watching the young Chinese woman. High in the abandoned Copper Creek mine, a gaunt figure in tattered clothes spent his days carefully documenting evidence with a stolen camera, and his nights slipping into town like a vengeful spirit driven by a father's love and a desperate man's cunning. Chen Wei had been living in the mine shaft for 2 years, surviving on rats and rainwater while avoiding the Hip Yi Tong assassins who had tracked him from San Francisco. He'd watched his daughter arrive in Cinder Bluff with a mixture of joy and terror, longing to reveal himself while knowing that doing so might bring death to them both. The torn paper Lin Mei had found was no figment of imagination. It was part of a longer message Chen had left in her shack during one of his nightly visits, though he'd been forced to flee when drunken miners had passed too close to his hiding spot. But Chen Wei was more than just a hiding man. He was a father preparing for war. During his time in the mine, he'd witnessed something that would change everything. Jack Harlan, the mayor's son, using the abandoned shafts as a hiding place for stolen goods and a meeting point with gambling associates from Denver. Chen had methodically photographed every visit, every conversation, every piece of evidence, using a camera he'd stolen from the mining company's surveying equipment, developing the images in the total darkness of the deepest tunnels. Jack Harlan himself was unaware of being watched, though he'd begun to feel increasingly paranoid about shadows and strange sounds in the mine. He'd even confided to his gambling partners that he suspected rival players might be tracking his movements, never imagining that a Chinese father with a stolen camera was building a case that would destroy him. The morning of the lynching dawned blood red with dust and heat, the temperature already climbing past 80 degrees before sunrise. Jack Harlan stood on the steps of City Hall, his expensive clothes wrinkled from a sleepless night, spent destroying evidence, his hands shaking with whiskey tremors, as he addressed a crowd of increasingly angry citizens. Friends. He called out his voice, carrying the practiced authority of privilege born from years of his father's political protection. We've all suffered from these crimes that plague our town like a pestilence. But last night the devil showed his true face. The monthly mining payroll was stolen right from under our noses. The crowd of 70-odd people murmured angrily. Most were miners' families who hadn't seen wages in weeks, their children going hungry, while the town's economy crumbled under the weight of mysterious thefts that seemed to target the most vulnerable businesses with surgical precision. Now I ask you. Jack continued, his voice rising dramatically as he gestured toward the poor quarter of town. Who among us moves in shadows, who speaks in foreign tongues and keeps to herself like she's hiding something dark? Sam Colton stood at the crowd's edge, a cold dread settling in his stomach as he recognized the dangerous rhetoric. He'd heard these same words 7 years ago, had watched them build from whispers to shouts to screams that echoed across burning fields. The Chinese girl, someone yelled from the back. She's been acting mighty suspicious, always skulking around. Exactly. Jack pointed toward Murphy's store with theatrical flair, his face bright with the fever of desperation. Lin Mei has been in our town for months, learning our routines, studying our weaknesses like a spy. These aren't random crimes. They're calculated attacks by someone who understands our ways but owes us no loyalty. The crowd's murmur grew louder, angrier. Men who'd lost jobs, women whose children went hungry, all looking for someone to blame for their suffering, someone different enough to hate without guilt. This is madness, Sam muttered, pushing forward through the press of unwashed bodies. Old Pete Mackenzie, whose hardware store had been robbed twice in the past month, stepped forward with clenched fists. She's been casing my store for weeks, eyeing the lock on my cash box with those sneaky foreign eyes. Should have known better than to trust her kind. And she's always around when things go missing, added Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, whose own jewelry had vanished during Sunday services. Yesterday, I saw her near the Morrison place, probably planning that barn fire that killed those poor horses. Each accusation built on the last, creating a tower of lies that grew stronger with repetition and the mob's need for simple answers to complex problems. Sam tried to push closer to the front to speak reason to the crowd, but Sheriff Elias Thorne grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "I don't," the sheriff whispered urgently, his weathered face pale with the recognition of danger. "Not yet. I've seen lynch mobs before they have to burn themselves out, or they'll consume everyone in their path like wildfire." "You can't let them take her," Sam hissed, pulling against Thorne's grip. "I won't let them kill her." Thorne replied grimly, his voice tight with the knowledge of his own limitations. "I've already sent Billy riding hard for Boulder. The territorial marshal should be here within 2 hours with a full posse. We just need to buy time." But time was a luxury they didn't possess. The crowd was already moving toward Murphy's store like a living organism with murderous intent. And Sam could see the bloodlust building in their faces, like storm clouds gathering strength. High above town, Chen Wei watched through a stolen spyglass from his hiding place in the mine shaft, his heart hammering as he saw the mob actually moving toward his daughter. He'd been preparing for this day for months, gathering evidence and formulating plans. But seeing the crowd's hatred made real filled him with a terror that threatened to overcome his careful strategy. He looked down at the bundle beside him, letters, photographs, stolen goods, and a detailed map of Jack Harlan's criminal activities. Then, at the ancient kung fu training manual his own father had given him decades ago in China. Everything depended on timing. Reveal himself too early, and Jack would find a way to discredit the evidence. Too late, and Lin Mei would burn. In the stifling heat of the laundry room, Lin Mei looked up from her washboard as the door burst open with violence that shook dust from the ceiling beams. Her confusion quickly turned to terror as she saw the hostile faces and the rope in Jack Harlan's hands, the same rope used for hanging horse thieves and claim jumpers. "Please," she said, backing against the wall until the rough wood scraped her shoulders. "I do nothing wrong. Father, come back soon." But her words were lost in the crowd's roar as they surged forward to drag her toward the flames that would define them, all their faces transformed by hatred into something barely human. The mob hauled Lin Mei through Cinder Bluff's dusty streets like hunters displaying their prize. Her desperate pleas drowned out by their chants of "Burn the Witch" and "Foreign Devil's Judgment Day." Jack Harlan walked at the front of the procession, the hemp rope that bound her wrists cutting into her skin as she stumbled to keep pace with their eager march toward the town square. Sam Colton forced his way through the press of bodies, his heart pounding as memories of Sarah and Emma flooded back with the intensity of physical blows. He could see his wife's face in Lin Mei's terrified features, could hear his daughter's voice in her cries for mercy that fell on deaf ears. The crowd reached the town square where several men had already begun piling dry wood and kindling into a bonfire with the efficiency of practice. The speed of their work suggested this had been planned well in advance, Not the spontaneous burst of justice they claimed, but a calculated execution designed to rid their community of unwanted elements. "Sheriff," Sam called to Elias Thorne, who was following at a careful distance, like a man walking through a minefield. "You have to stop this before it goes too far." Thorne's weathered face was pale beneath his hat brim, sweat beading despite the morning heat. At 58, he'd kept the peace in Cinder Bluff for 12 years, but never had he faced a mob this size or this determined to see blood spilled. "I count near 70 people here, Colton," he said quietly, his hand resting on his gun butt but not drawing. "Half of them are armed with hunting rifles and pistols. If I try to stop them by force now, they'll kill all three of us and hang me from the same tree. So you're just going to watch them murder an innocent girl? Billy's riding hard for Boulder right now." Thorne replied, his voice strained with the weight of impossible choices. "The territorial marshal will be here with a full posse inside 2 hours. We just need to keep her alive until then." His words were cut off by the sound of hammering, as the mob drove 2 wooden posts deep into the ground, on either side of their growing pyre. Lin Mei was forced to stand between them while they bound her wrists to the posts, with heavy rope suspending her above the pile of kindling like a scarecrow awaiting the match. "This is murder," Sam shouted as he approached the group, his voice carrying across the square. "You have no proof she's done anything wrong?" Big Tom Morrison, whose barn had been destroyed the week before, along with 3 prize horses, turned to face him with eyes full of grief and rage. "Proof? Look around you, stranger. Foreign girl shows up, things start disappearing. My horses are dead because of her devil magic. She wouldn't steal bread if she was starving to death." Sam shot back, his own anger rising. "I've watched this girl for months. She feeds stray dogs with her own food." "Maybe you're sweet on her," Pete McKenzie called out with a cruel laugh. "Got a taste for exotic women, do you?" The crowd's laughter was like the baying of hounds, and Sam felt his face burn with anger. These people would twist any defense of Lin Mei into something shameful. "Mrs. Patterson," Sam called out suddenly, focusing on the banker's wife, who had accused Lin Mei earlier. "Your jewelry went missing during Sunday services, right? When exactly did you notice it was gone?" The woman looked confused by the direct question. "Well, it was after church when I got home, and Lin Mei was at Murphy's store all Sunday morning washing clothes. I saw her there myself." "So how could she have been in your house stealing jewelry?" Mrs. Patterson's face flushed as she realized the logical impossibility of her accusation. Several other people in the crowd began to shift uncomfortably as Sam's question forced them to examine their own assumptions. But Jack Harlan wasn't about to let doubt creep into his carefully orchestrated mob. He approached with a burning torch from the blacksmith's forge, his eyes bright with desperation and alcohol. "Enough talk," he shouted, raising the torch high above his head. Actions speak louder than words, and her foreign devil actions have spoken loud enough. Above them, Lin Mei hung suspended between the posts, her feet dangling inches above the growing pile of wood. Tears streamed down her face as she looked out at the sea of hostile faces, searching desperately for even a glimmer of compassion in the madness that surrounded her. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crowd's excited murmuring. "Father watching over me. He come back. Please wait." But her words only seemed to inflame the crowd further. Several men began shouting about heathen lies and foreign superstitions, their voices building to a crescendo of hatred that drowned out any possibility of reason. Jack Harlan looked around at the faces surrounding him, faces full of anger, fear, and the desperate need to blame someone for their suffering. This was his moment, the climax of months of carefully planted suspicions and misdirected rage. "Let's send this devil back to hell where she belongs," he shouted, lowering the torch toward the kindling. The crowd roared its approval, a sound like thunder rolling across the mountains. Sam knew that reason had fled entirely, that only action could save Lin Mei now. In desperation, he looked around the square, searching for anything that might help a water source, allies in the crowd, some distraction that might buy them precious seconds. That's when he saw it, a metal wash basin sitting outside the barber shop, half filled with soapy water from the morning's shaves. It wasn't much, but it was something. As Jack Harlan lowered the torch toward the kindling, Sam broke into a run, his boots pounding against the hard-packed earth as he raced against time and hatred. Sam reached the wash basin just as the flames caught the dry wood with a hungry whoosh that sent a wave of heat across the square. He grabbed the metal container and ran back toward the firewater sloshing over the sides. But before he could throw it on the flames, 3 men tackled him to the ground with bone-jarring force. "Stop him!" Jack Harlan shouted as Sam rolled in the dirt, fighting to keep hold of the basin while boots and fists rained down on him from all directions. Tom Morrison's boot connected with Sam's ribs, driving the air from his lungs in a painful gasp, while Pete McKenzie wrenched the wash basin from his grip and hurled it aside. The precious water spread uselessly across the dusty ground, darkening the earth for a few precious seconds before evaporating in the heat. "You want to burn with her, stranger?" Morrison growled his weathered hands, gripping Sam's shirt front and hauling him to his feet. The fire was climbing higher now, thick smoke beginning to curl around Lin Mei's legs, while sparks drifted upward on the rising heat. She coughed and gasped, pulling her knees up as high as the ropes would allow, but the intense heat was making her cotton dress smoke at the edges. 50 seconds. Someone in the crowd shouted with cruel excitement. "Look at her dance on the devil's stage." Lin Mei's struggles against the ropes were growing more frantic as the fire climbed toward her feet. Her wrists were bleeding now where the hemp had cut deep into her skin, and her face was streaked with tears and soot while her lungs burned with each breath of smoke-filled air. Sam struggled against his captors, his mind racing as he watched Lin Mei's cotton dress begin to darken and smolder. The hem was starting to curl and blacken, and he could see the fabric beginning to smoke as sparks landed on the material like tiny brands. In the abandoned mine above town, Chen Wei watched through his spyglass as the scene unfolded, his hands shaking as he saw the flames reaching for his daughter. Every instinct screamed at him to run down the hillside and reveal himself, but he forced himself to wait for the perfect moment when Jack was isolated enough for the evidence to speak louder than denials. A sudden gust of wind swept across the square, fanning the flames into a towering inferno that roared like a living beast. The fire climbed with terrifying speed, and Lin Mei's dress caught fire at the hem with a sound like tearing silk that carried clearly across the suddenly hushed square. 40 seconds. The crowd chanted now, their voices merging into a single bloodthirsty roar. The flames began to climb Lin Mei's skirt with horrifying speed, the cotton fabric igniting like paper soaked in oil. She thrashed desperately against her bonds, but her movements only fanned the fire higher, the heat so intense that several people in the crowd stepped back to shield their faces. "Help me!" She screamed, her voice breaking with terror as the fire reached her knees and the pain became unbearable. "Someone help me, please." Sam broke free from his captors with a surge of desperate strength, throwing his elbow into Morrison's solar plexus and spinning away as the big man doubled over, gasping for breath. But there was nowhere to run, nowhere to find help fast enough. The fire was too large, too hot, and Lin Mei's screams were growing weaker as smoke filled her lungs. Through the chaos and heat shimmer, Sam saw movement at the edge of the square. A figure was pushing through the crowd, someone in ragged clothes with wild hair and desperate eyes, who moved with purpose rather than mere curiosity. 30 seconds. The countdown continued merciless as the approaching flames that were now climbing toward Lin Mei's waist, the heat so intense it was blistering her exposed skin. Then the stranger raised his voice in a shout that cut through the mob's roar like a blade through silk, speaking words in Mandarin that made Lin Mei's eyes go wide with shock and disbelief even through her agony. "Lin Mei wo de nuer." The voice that rang across the town square was hoarse from disuse, but unmistakably strong, the voice of a man who had spent 2 years rehearsing this moment in the darkness of a mine shaft. The crowd's chanting faltered as a figure in tattered clothes pushed through their ranks with surprising determination. The man looked like a scarecrow, come to life, hollow cheeks, shadowed by malnutrition clothes, hanging loose on a frame that had once been powerful, but was now worn down by hardship and constant fear. But his dark eyes blazed with the fierce light of paternal love. And when he spoke Lin Mei's full name in perfect Mandarin, her reaction was unmistakable, despite the flames that were now climbing past her waist, searing her skin through the burning fabric. "Baba," she whispered through the smoke and flames, the Chinese word for father, barely audible above the crackling fire that continued its relentless climb toward her chest. Chen Wei, alive against all odds, present against all expectations, didn't waste precious seconds on explanations. From his ragged coat, he pulled a bundle wrapped in oiled canvas and hurled it at Jack Harlan's feet with the force of 2 years' worth of righteous fury. But Jack Harlan was faster than expected. With the desperation of a cornered animal, he lunged for the bundle, trying to kick it into the fire before anyone could see its contents. "Destroy the evidence." Jack screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "It's all lies, forgeries." That's when Chen Wei moved with the fluid grace of ancient training, his body remembering kung fu forms his father had taught him decades ago in China. He flowed around Jack's clumsy grab, like water around stone, his palm striking Jack's wrist with precise force that sent the younger man stumbling backward, while the bundle burst open, spilling its damning contents across the dirt. Several letters in Jack's own handwriting scattered across the ground, along with a small leather pouch filled with silver coins, detailed photographs of stolen goods, and most damning of all, a gold pocket watch engraved with the initials J.H. that glinted in the firelight. 20 seconds. Someone shouted, though their voice lacked the earlier enthusiasm, as confusion began to ripple through the crowd. "This man is the thief." Chen Wei shouted in heavily accented but clear English, his voice carrying the authority of absolute truth. "I have proof, letters to gambling bosses in Denver, confessing he steals from businesses, photographs of him hiding stolen goods, watch taken from Morrison Ranch, buried in mine shaft, where I live in hiding for 2 years. The crowd's attention swiveled like a weather vane in shifting wind, their certainty cracking as they looked between the evidence at their feet and Jack Harlan's suddenly pale face. But Lin Mei was still burning the flames now, climbing past her waist toward her chest, her screams growing weaker as smoke overcame her ability to breathe. Pete Mackenzie bent down and picked up one of the letters with trembling hands, his lips moving, as he read Jack's detailed confession to a gambling partner about stealing money from various businesses around town to cover his mounting debts. "This is Jack's handwriting," Mackenzie said slowly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. "I've seen it on dozens of IOUs at my store." Tom Morrison snatched up the pocket watch, his weathered hands trembling as he recognized the familiar weight and engraving that had belonged to his grandfather. "This disappeared the night of the barn fire," he said, his voice thick with dawning realization. "I thought it burned with everything else." 10 seconds. The countdown continued, but now it carried desperation rather than excitement as people began to understand what they were about to do. The flames had reached Lin Mei's chest now, her dress fully engulfed, while the wooden posts began to char and weaken under the intense heat. Her head lolled forward as consciousness started to fade, overcome by smoke and the unbearable pain that racked her body. Chen Wei wasn't finished. From his coat he produced additional evidence, a small leather journal documenting Jack's gambling debts that totaled more than most residents of Cinder Bluff would see in 10 lifetimes. And most shocking of all, a series of photographs showing Jack in the mine hiding stolen goods and meeting with dangerous-looking men from Denver. "I used stolen camera from mining office," Chen Wei explained rapidly, his English stilted but passionate. "Hide in deepest tunnels, develop pictures in darkness. This man come to mine many times, hiding stolen things, meeting with Denver gamblers, planning crimes. He knows someone watching but think is rival gambler, not father protecting daughter." Sheriff Thorne pushed forward and examined the photographs with growing amazement. The images were clear and undeniable. Jack Harlan in the mine shaft, Jack burying stolen goods, Jack meeting with known criminals from Denver's gambling district. 5 seconds. Dr. Margaret Henley's voice cut across the square as she arrived with her medical bag, looking up at Lin Mei in horror. But even as the truth began to dawn on the crowd, the flames continued their relentless climb. The fire had now reached Lin Mei's neck, and the wooden posts were beginning to lean inward as the intense heat weakened their structure. She was unconscious now, her body hanging limp from the ropes that were themselves beginning to smoke and char. Sam Colton looked around frantically, his mind racing as he searched for some way to save her before it was too late. The crowd was backing away now, their bloodlust replaced by shame and confusion. But Lin Mei was still dying above the inferno that showed no signs of diminishing. That's when his eyes fell on the old church tower at the edge of the square, with its rain barrel positioned to catch water from the roof. The barrel was 50 feet away and 20 feet above ground level, but it represented the only source of water large enough to make a real difference. 3 seconds. Someone cried out, and Sam knew he was out of time for conventional solutions. With Jack Harlan's desperate panic and the crowd in chaos, Sam broke into a sprint toward the church tower, his boots pounding against the hard earth as bullets whined around him. Jack had drawn his pistol and was firing wildly, trying to kill anyone who might spread the truth about his crimes. 2 seconds. The first bullet missed Sam by inches, splintering wood from the church door as he reached the base of the tower. The wooden ladder up the side was old and rickety, creaking ominously under his weight as he climbed with desperate speed, his hands burning against the rough wood as splinters drove deep into his palms. 1 second. Behind him, chaos erupted as Tom Morrison tackled Jack Harlan to the ground, both men fighting for control of the pistol, while Chen Wei broke free from the remaining mob members using fluid kung fu movements that scattered his attackers like leaves in a windstorm. At the top of the tower, Sam found what he'd hoped for, a rain barrel containing nearly 40 gallons of precious water. But getting it to the fire would require split-second timing and more luck than any reasonable man should expect. His hands were already bleeding from the rough ladder, and a second gunshot had torn through his left shoulder, sending hot blood down his arm. The barrel was too heavy to carry, but Sam had noticed something during his climb, a long rope hanging from the church bell, originally used to ring it from ground level. If he could tie the rope around the barrel and knock it over at just the right angle. Time's up. Dr. Henley's voice carried across the square as Lin Mei's body went completely limp, the flames now reaching her face, while the charred posts groaned under the stress of the intense heat. Working with frantic efficiency despite his wounded shoulder and bleeding hands, Sam tied the rope around the barrel's iron hoops and positioned it at the edge of the tower platform. The angle had to be perfect, too shallow, and the water would miss the fire entirely too steep, and it would hit the ground before reaching Lin Mei. Below him, Chen Wei had broken free from his remaining captors and was fighting his way toward his daughter. But 3 men still blocked his path, while Jack Harlan continued to fire wildly with his pistol, trying to kill anyone who might expose his crimes. A third bullet whistled past Sam's head so close he could feel the heat of its passage against his cheek. His hands were slippery with blood from the splinters, and his wounded shoulder making it difficult to maintain his grip on the heavy barrel. Sam took aim and shoved the barrel over the edge of the platform. The heavy container plummeted toward the town square, 40 gallons of water trailing behind it like a liquid comet. For a heart-stopping moment, it looked like it would miss the fire entirely, passing harmlessly to one side of the burning pyre, where Lin Mei hung unconscious and dying. But the rope was longer than expected, and as it reached its full extension, the barrel's trajectory curved sharply. However, the angle was still wrong. Instead of hitting the fire directly, it was going to crash into the ground several feet away. In desperation, Sam grabbed the bell rope and swung down from the tower like a circus performer using his weight to adjust the barrel's path at the last possible second. The container swung in a wide arc that brought it crashing directly into the heart of the inferno. The barrel exploded on impact, sending a massive geyser of water in all directions and instantly transforming the towering fire into a cloud of steam and smoke. The sudden deluge extinguished most of the flames, but Lin Mei was still suspended above the smoldering remains, her body burned and unconscious from smoke inhalation. Sam hit the muddy ground, hard his wounded shoulder, sending spikes of agony through his entire body. But he forced himself to move. The wooden posts were still standing, but barely, their charred surfaces crackling ominously as they began to lean inward toward each other. "Lin Mei," he shouted, wading through the steaming wreckage toward her. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with difficulty through the pain and smoke damage. "Sam," she whispered, her voice barely audible through her burned throat. "Father. Real. He's real." Sam confirmed, pulling out his knife to cut the ropes that bound her wrists. "Your father's alive, and he saved you." But as he sawed through the hemp fibers with hands that could barely grip the knife handle, a final gunshot rang out behind him. Jack Harlan had broken free from Tom Morrison and was raising his pistol for one last desperate shot at the man who had exposed his crimes. "Die, you interfering bastard!" Jack screamed, his face twisted with rage and desperation. The bullet took Sam in the back, spinning him around and driving him to his knees in the steaming mud. Blood spread across his shirt, but he forced himself to keep cutting at Lin Mei's bonds, his vision blurring as shock began to set in. "Help me," he called to Chen Wei, who was fighting his way through the remaining chaos. "Help me cut the ropes." Chen Wei appeared beside him like an avenging spirit, producing a sharp knife from his coat and slicing through Lin Mei's remaining bonds with quick, precise cuts. She fell into her father's arms just as the charred posts finally gave way, collapsing in a shower of sparks and burning debris that would have crushed her if she'd still been tied to them. "My daughter," Chen Wei whispered in Chinese, his voice breaking with 2 years of suppressed emotion as he cradled her burned body. "My precious daughter. Forgive me for leaving you alone." Jack Harlan raised his pistol one final time, but before he could fire, Sheriff Thorne appeared behind him and struck him down with the butt of his rifle. "That's enough killing for one day," Thorne said grimly, kicking the pistol away from Jack's unconscious form. As Dr. Henley rushed forward with her medical bag to treat Lin Mei's burns and Sam's gunshot wounds, the crowd began to disperse in shame and confusion. The evidence scattered across the ground told a story they could no longer deny. They had almost murdered an innocent girl to protect the real criminal who had been stealing from them for months. "Is she going to live?" Sam asked weakly as the doctor worked to stabilize Lin Mei's condition. "She'll live," Dr. Henley replied, though her voice was tight with concern. "Severe burns and smoke inhalation, but she's young and strong. You both are." Chen Wei knelt beside his daughter, speaking softly in Mandarin, while tears streamed down his weathered face. The reunion he had dreamed of for 2 years was finally happening, though not in the way he had ever imagined. The flames of Cinder Bluff were finally extinguished, but the healing would take much longer to complete. 6 months after the flames nearly claimed an innocent life, Cinder Bluff had transformed from a town poisoned by hatred into a community determined to atone for its sins. The change began 3 days after the attempted lynching, when the townspeople organized a public ceremony of apology in the same square where Lin Mei had nearly died. Sam Colton stood beside Lin Mei and Chen Wei, as Mayor Harold Harlan, who had resigned in shame after his son's crimes were exposed, delivered a formal apology on behalf of the entire community. The ceremony was simple but powerful, with each person who had participated in the mob stepping forward to personally ask forgiveness. "We let fear and prejudice blind us to the truth," Tom Morrison said when his turn came, his weathered hat clutched in his hands. "I nearly helped murder an innocent girl because I was too angry and too stupid to think clearly. There's no excuse for what we almost did." One by one, the others followed Pete Mackenzie, admitting his cowardice, Mrs. Patterson acknowledging her cruel assumptions, even Dr. Henley confessing her failure to speak up when she knew Jack Harlan was guilty. But perhaps the most significant change came in the form of practical action. The townspeople established a fund to help Chinese immigrants and other minorities who faced discrimination, while Morrison deeded a proper house to Lin Mei and Chen Wei as compensation for their suffering. Mackenzie offered Chen Wei a partnership in his expanding hardware business, recognizing the older man's intelligence and work ethic. "There's something I want to tell you about that day," Lin Mei said to Sam as they walked through the town's main street, her scars still visible, but healing well. "About what I saw in the flames." Sam looked at her curiously, noting how her English had improved dramatically over the past months. "What do you mean?" "When I was hanging there surrounded by fire and thinking I was going to die, I saw something through the smoke. Two figures standing beside you, a woman and a little girl. They seemed to be pointing toward the church tower, showing you the way." Sam felt a chill run down his spine despite the warm afternoon air. "Lin Mei, that was impossible. You were hallucinating from smoke inhalation and trauma." "Maybe," she said with a gentle smile. "But my father taught me that love can reach across any distance, even death. Your wife and daughter. I think their spirits guided you to save my life." Sam considered her words carefully. In the month since the fire, he had finally been able to visit Sarah and Emma's graves in Kansas, making peace with their memory and his own survival. Whether Lin Mei had truly seen them or merely imagined their presence, the important thing was that he had finally found the courage to act instead of running away. "There's something else," Lin Mei continued. "My brother Wei Ming is coming to visit next week. He's completed his medical studies in San Francisco and wants to meet the man who saved his sister." "That's wonderful news," Sam replied, genuinely pleased for her. He's also been working with federal authorities to investigate the Hip Yi Tong's activities. They believe they have enough evidence to shut down the organization permanently, which means Father will finally be truly safe. The revelation lifted a weight from Sam's shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. The idea that Chen Wei might still be in danger had haunted him since learning about the Tong's threats, but now there was hope for a permanent solution. As they reached the town cemetery, Sam paused at two simple headstones he had erected with his first month's pay as Cinder Bluff's deputy sheriff. The granite markers bore the names of Sarah Running Bear Colton and Emma Rose Colton, finally giving his family the memorial they deserved. "I did it, Sarah," he said quietly, placing wildflowers at the base of his wife's headstone. "I saved her. I didn't run away this time." Chen Wei approached and placed a small jade carving on Emma's headstone, a traditional Chinese symbol of protection for children. "In our culture, we believe the spirits of the departed watch over those they leave behind," he said softly. "Your family. They gave you the strength to save mine." The three of them stood in comfortable silence, each reflecting on the strange paths that bring people together and the power of love to transcend even death itself. As autumn painted the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Sam Colton had finally found his place in the world. No longer a drifter haunted by ghosts, but a man at peace with his past and hopeful about his future. Lin Mei and Chen Wei had built a new life in Cinder Bluff, surrounded by people who had learned the hard way that hatred and fear could destroy everything good if left unchecked. The flames that had once threatened to consume them all were now just a memory replaced by the warm glow of justice redemption and a community's commitment to never again let prejudice overcome humanity. In Cinder Bluff, Colorado territory, the age of mob rule was over. The age of healing had begun, and it would last for generations to come.